Vernomatic Productions.
Are you ready?
Live from the Metal Mayhem Studios in Rochester, New York.
We are gold.
And heard around the world by metalheads just like you. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Heavy metal music.
Your weekly dose of metal music, interviews, album reviews, news, and more. Want to be part of the show? Send us a message through our website, metalmayhemroc.com, or hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. Search Metal Mayhem ROC.
It's getting nice and heavy.
And now, welcome tonight's host, John the Vernomatic Verno.
Good evening, everybody. As always, Thursday nights, new content drops. Tonight's show, we're continuing our History of Metal series. The year 1990. Co-host Metal Walt and Ian O'Rourke are going to be joining me in just a second. We're going to find out what it's like in the metal landscape as the 80s come to an end, the 90s come in, and things are upside down. That's coming up in just a second. But first, remind you to get up to that metalmayhemroc.com website. Do us a favor, join our community. Get on the email mailing list. Get updates on new shows, links to the radio show on Monday night. Coming up in the next couple weeks, right before the holidays, a brand new merch page is coming up with tons of goodies for you and your favorite metalhead at the holidays. While you're there, download some past shows, subscribe to the podcast, rate and review. All that kind of stuff really does help. Recent episodes included Rick Ventura of Riot Act and formerly of the band Riot. Their direct support on the Fall Raven tour across America. Metal Mayhem is bringing that tour to Rochester for a showcase show next Thursday, October 13th, over at Photo City Music Hall. It's their only Western New York appearance, by the way. Come on down. You can buy tickets on our website. Go to the House of Guitars Record Archive. $20. Great show. Two killer opening bands locally. Wicked and Displacer are on the bill. It's a low-dose show for four killer bands. So Rick Ventura was on talking about the Riot Act band. Nigel Glockler of Saxon, his new band 6x6, was on a couple of weeks ago. And Frank Bello of Anthrax talking about their fall UK and Europe tour. So that's what you could find at the website. There's tons of goodies there. But let me get Metal Walt and Ian O'Rourke out of the green room and ready for this show. Hey, Metal Walt, you ready for 1990?
Indeed I am. It actually feels weird even saying it because you don't associate metal and the hair bands with the 90s, right? But 90 is really a mix of many, many things. And let's not fool ourselves here. The 80s trend continued, just maybe not from the big bands like Def Leppard and Bon Jovi, but there were still many, many hair, Sunstrip Trip type bands that were releasing new albums, a lot of debuts. And then you get into the heavier scene, you had a lot of rebound albums from some of the bigger bands. There was a supergroup that formed. There was a major singer from a major artist that had a song, a really strong solo release, and then that same band came out with a release later in the year. One major band that was always on the rise, kind of hit their peak in 1990. The thrash scene was thriving. There was a big tour with a bunch of bands on there. And then there was the influence of the changing of the scene. You got a couple really big artists that would really, really grow in the 90s, and they cut their teeth in 1990. And then a few side notes about some of the, let's say, the events that happened. So that's 1990 in a nutshell. It's a big mix. What we like to do right now is let's just start talking about some of those 80s bands, right? Let's get right into it. There's no rhyme or reason. Cinderella releases Heartbreak Station. You know what? In my opinion, this was the end of them, right? I mean, I don't know. I think they came out with maybe one more album after this. It was a so-so album. It continued on that bluesy track. You had the title track and then Shelter Me, which was still a smash on the MTV. But overall, it was a bit of a clunker to me. Ian, tell us something about some of these debuts. Firehouse, Steelheart, any of them.
Steelheart was pretty big. So was Firehouse. I mean, Firehouse, you basically could say that they, their career was based on that first album because not many people can recount a lot of material from the second album unless you're a deep, dark Firehouse fan. But it really was a solid good hard rock, or pop metal, whatever you want to call it, album for when it came out. Steelheart was another one. They kind of put themselves on a different transcendency. Mikhail, whatever is, however you say his name there, went on later on in the early 2000s to do a lot of the vocal work on the Rockstar soundtrack. And the band continued to tour. They are huge in the European metal scene over there. A lot of that AOR type stuff. They do a lot of festival shows and really jam out pretty good. They always do a good draw. So I thought they were great. Extreme, they had their second album, which I know you and I have talked about it before. Porno Graffiti. I mean, that is a monster of an album. And that's, even going without the two big, laid back numbers that kind of dominated the MTV. They had Decadence Dance was the first song off there, and they just went ahead and kicked it in with the Afterburners. So that was a really great album.
I got a question. Steelheart, was that band that had that one song?
The first, that one big power ballad was their first big song. Yeah,
okay, that's the only song I've ever remembered them.
I agree with you, Vern. Never Let You Go is the only song I can never think of with Steelheart, and it's the only thing I'm aware of from that album. I sometimes get Steelheart and Firehouse confused, but Firehouse, I agree with Ian. That was a cool band, man. They had rockers and just that towed that perfect line of 80s / catchy and heavy. I just remember this band. To me, it screams strip club music, right? I remember back then, Don't Treat Me Bad, Shake and Tumble, All She Wrote. I feel like that was me at my first strip bar when I was 21 in 1991, right?
All right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. But that Steelheart song, that's a tearjerker. That's like
it's a wedding. It's a wedding song.
Yeah,
it's a wedding song.
Or like an end of a rom-com movie. But hey,
listen,
great song.
First dude though that I ever heard that was able to hit that register above Halford. I mean, this guy was almost approaching Mariah Carey, heights with his vocal prowess, and that was pretty impressive at the time. I remember that.
Well, you guys are on a roll. Warrant, Cherry Pie. This was their heyday. Was that from was Cherry Pie their follow up to that Dirty, Rotten, Filthy Rich album?
Yep. And that was, Waldo attests to this too. Janie Lane went on record and he was like, he did not want to write that song Cherry Pie, but the record company insisted they needed some kind of single. They wanted to call the album Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the second song that they released for the album. And you can tell at this point, this is the one thing you're going to see with a lot of these bands. After Appetite for Destruction and after the explosion of Metallica, darker, heavier, grittier side started to rear its head with a lot of these, pop bands. They finally were like, okay, we can do the stuff that we want to do that way. And that's what they tried to do. But unfortunately, this was another example of the record company determining what was going to be done by the band. But overall, it's a good album.
Well, and that's a fair point, Ian. But look at that. Look what that title track did for their career. The first album was big. The video alone, it stood out. You had the sexy girl in there in the cutoff shorts and the tank top, licking her fingers with the cherry pie. I think either one of the guys from Poison or Crew or somebody ended up with that girl at some point in time.
Yeah, Janie Lane married her. They were together for a long time.
Yeah, Bobby Brown.
Yep. Bobby Brown was hot.
Yeah, that was she was hot, but that was the visual.
Oh yeah.
That was the downfall of this type of music. This is what Kurt Cobain and those other wah-wahs were all crying about.
Yeah, this would probably be the apex of it at that point there, I think.
Warrant wasn't that bad. I'm sorry, Walt, I hijacked your thought, so.
No, it's okay. I think we can revisit some of these maybe later too, but let's just finish out the debuts. All right. So you had two other ones. You had the Trickster self-titled debut. And again, I have a soft spot for these guys because they're local guys. Steve Brown and PJ Farley are still out in the scene. They're playing around with Eric Martin in 2022. You know what?
Yep.
They were, again, a band I thought was a little soft at the time, but I really came to appreciate these guys. They were warrior guys that cut their teeth in the North Jersey scene and made it. And then the other one is Lynch Mob. Wicked Sensation, Oni Logan, George Lynch. You got the title track, River of Love. Ian, you're the guitar player. That had to resonate with you a little bit, that album?
Huge. Because I was always a disciple of Eddie Van Halen, but Lynch was one of those guys that came in right afterwards that I followed adamantly. And I waited with bated breath for this CD to come out at the time. Actually, I own it on cassette because I was still a devout cassette listener because I still thought that it sounded better. But yeah, man, I mean, Wicked Sensation was a freaking great album from top to bottom. You got Wild Mick Brown on the drums, Anthony Esposito on the bass. It was a really great, solid band. Oni Logan, I think, he was another guy that got a little too big for his own head, and then this started getting in the way, and so did a little bit of the coke and everything else. And after they did that initial first tour, he and Lynch was pissed because he kept freaking screwing up on the, on stage. And he's like, no, I'm done with this. I don't want him anymore. So that took a long time.
Allegedly on that coke incident. Yeah. Allegedly.
Oh, well.
Now, fast forward to 2022. I just read a year ago, I heard they switched the name from Lynch Mob because it wasn't PC. And then I just read the other day that, is that Ani guy back in the band and Lynch Mob?
He's been in and out of that band probably 10 different times. You'd have to do a Wikipedia search on the amount of members that have been in that band. It was actually comical. I think last year they were running into problems with singers and they were literally pulling people in local areas to fill in for 3 or 4 shows at a time. Yeah. It was pretty pathetic, actually.
But the funny thing was they went back to Lynch Mob. I guess they're not too PC anymore.
Last I knew it was Electric Freedom or something like that was the name of the band.
Yeah, whether or not he's sticking with it, I don't goddamn know. You do a search on it, and he still comes up with all the information. Lynch Mob.
Well, I'm telling you, we taped this October 4th, 2022. I just saw on Blabbermouth or somewhere that the big headline: Lynch Mob regrouping, new material, but it wasn't this electric whatever you said it was. It was Lynch Mob. So, in any case,
against it.
Poison, Flesh and Blood.
Last one with CC.
Okay. Is it any good?
It's got some solid stuff on there. It wasn't as commercially successful, I think, as what had come before, but I mean, it still had some great songs. This was where you started to see what ended up becoming the next stage with Kotzen. You could see where Bret Michaels' influence with the songwriting was starting to come in a little bit more. It wasn't as much, where if he needed something with some heft and some balls, that CC, was one of the co-writers. And you could see where this band was starting to fray, at least internally, some of those guys with the drinking, drugs, and ego and everything else. But it wasn't terrible.
If you say so.
I'm just saying. Yeah.
No, I mean, all right. And then the other King of the Hill in that era, Rat Detonator by 1990. No?
Listen, I think they put out the same album, the last 3 albums. It was like 2, maybe 3 good songs and nothing left. This was the end of their time. They were a club band at this point. Yeah. Nothing. Loving You is a Dirty Job was a good song, and maybe Shame, Shame, Shame. But I don't remember anything about this album. Robin Crosby's last time in the band recording. Yeah, it was the end of them.
Believe it or not, the one song there, Nobody Rides for Free, that they did for the Point Break soundtrack is probably better than anything that's on this album. It's just got a whole better groove to it. It sounds a lot better. I mean, I know Robin's not there, but it feels more like the progression of Rat as it should have been, where this album was kind of like a regurgitation,
Well, fun fact from Metal Waltz concert archives. There's only been twice in my 30-something years of concert going where I've seen 2 shows in the same day. And December 1990, I saw the Judas Priest Megadeth Testament show at the Meadowlands Arena. It was a Friday night. Hauled ass home, dropped my friend off, drove to L'Amour's in Brooklyn, which is 50 minutes by car. And at that time, bands went on at like 2 a.m. And I saw Rat on the Detonator tour at L'Amour. So 2 shows in one night.
That's awesome. What isn't awesome is your buddy didn't double dip with you. Why didn't he go with you?
Yeah, you stuck it to him.
Why didn't your buddy go with you?
I think he was a little judgmental of those 80s bands at the time, and he was like, no thanks, it's 11:30, just drop me off.
Well, cool. You know what? Well, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. But
if fast forward in another, when we're doing 15 to 20 years later, in about another 3 years, I'll tell you about the second time that happened.
Okay, well, you know what? That's a nice tease. But what isn't a tease was the thrash tour of the summer, which was Clash of the Titans, Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Alice in Chains. I had a chance to see it up at Darien Lake. It was all of that. Fantastic. That was 1990, right? Or is that the spring
of
90? What's that?
Yeah.
Summer 1990.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I know the albums came out. Megadeth, rest in peace. Some
Great
say,
album.
yeah, great album. Their pinnacle, their best album.
Yeah, pretty close.
I mean,
I think so.
Holy War's Punishment Due.
Yep.
Now, if you were into Hangar 18, if you were to, someone never heard Megadeth and you were to play them, This Is Megadeth, and they listen to that. You know those guys that do those videos, you know, like the 2 black dudes that do the videos and they don't know metal and they sit there and they watch the Megadeth, Holy War's Punishment Due one. So, Megadeth still ends the show with that, Hangar 18, Lucretia, you know, the whole album is just great. Ian,
and it was a different sound. Sorry, but it was a different sound, guys. It was like, I don't know what to say. It was like maybe Marty Friedman and Nick Menza coming in, but it was like, it matured them and maybe made them, it sounded like more of a musician's thrash album than prior. And I think that's what I was enamored with there, right? And I think the song structures were not so one-dimensional. And I mean, that was my takeaway. It was my selling point to loving that band. Yeah.
Yeah, the musicianship with Menza and Friedman coming in jumped up huge. And it was so much you could see, you know, it's like we talked about before with Metallica, you know, the major jump from Kill 'Em All to Ride the Lightning, you know, and Ride the Lightning is kind of like that, you know, oh my God, but then you've got Master that comes afterwards and you can see this, it's just a succession. Well, what happened was those early albums, they were great. They were still very raw. As soon as he got this band together and they were working on this material, it just went kaboosh. It just blew right up, man. It was a huge album. I loved this album when it came out. It was probably the first real Megadeth album that I got fully behind. You know, some of the other stuff, I liked a lot of it, but some of it I was like, this one I was like, nope, this is great. I love it. I own it I think I own it on cassette and on CD still. So yeah, I was definitely impressed.
Anthrax. What was that Anthrax? Persistence of Time.
Time. Great album.
You think? Really?
I like it because they're another one that they kind of had this own progression on their own, the way that they did things. You know, you could see where they were kind of shifting, you know, I mean, oh man, it just, that first video for when Time came out, it was like I was like, oh my God, listen to this thing, you know, and the breakdowns in it with the, I mean, it just was monstrous, man. Monstrous.
It was a heavy, dark album.
Yeah.
Heavy, dark album. And they called it. They said, I remember when they went out on the Maiden tour, they said, this is going to be a different album. A different album than the prior ones, right? They stripped themselves. They got rid of the shorts and the yellow shirts, and they were back to being metal. I mean, Keep It in the Family, Belly of the Beast, right?
Belly of the Beast is so good.
Yeah. I mean, the only outlier in there became the hit. Got the Time was the outlier in the album. That became the only single from the album, right? But the rest of it is completely one common theme.
I don't think it aged well, and I didn't really care for it that much, honestly. I was just so into Among the Living And
Among is great though.
Spread into Disease. You know, the first three, State of Euphoria was terrible. You know, it was like, hey, we've gone over this. But Persistence, it wasn't bad. I think in a nutshell, I started steering away from Anthrax a little bit. I just liked their earlier stuff so much more.
See, I could see where this is a huge launch pad to when John Bush came and they made that change, because you could see where this is part of that, you know, that musical progression. You know, that it was almost like it was something that they needed to do at that point, so that way they could change their trajectory a little bit.
Lance, I know you're not too much into it, but any take on Slayer Seasons in the Abyss? Because this is another.
No, I did like this one. I think, you know, I'm not the biggest junkie of Slayer, but the title track, War Ensemble, Dead Skin Mask, you know, I mean, I think those are all killer, classic, legendary Slayer songs. The album cover was amazing. And I think, again, putting them on that package tour, maybe the first of many, many to come down the line, it was an exposure to them to a broader audience where they can now fit in with the genre, and you see 3 or 4 of these bands out on the road at the same time. So, yeah, I really appreciated that one. And definitely, that was my first time seeing them at the Garden on that Clash of the Titans tour, and it was great. It was great.
Yeah, I'm a big Slayer fan. Their first 4 or 5, you know, that sequence, and this fit right in there. I really like the Seasons in the Abyss. And then when Testament came around with Souls of Black, you know.
And it was another dark album.
Very dark album.
Yeah.
Very dark.
Yeah. But that was another great album, you know, and unfortunately, you know, that was that kind of that lead up towards Skolnick, you know, ended up, you know, leaving by the time they were going to work on the next thing there. You know, I mean, it's all these bands, you know, I mean, you have to wonder if it's you know, musicians getting burnt out doing stuff, you know, like Skolnick. I mean, when he ended up leaving for a while there, he was doing like jazz fusion stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actual jazz. Yeah, you're right. And then he got the gig with, you know, with Savatage, you know, years down the road, you know, for a Handful of Rain. But yeah, I mean, all the stuff is great. And let's not discount the band that toughed it out through all that bullshit on this tour was Alice in Chains opening up for these guys. Yep. I mean, they were getting, you know, people were, you know, yelling and throwing shit. And by, you know, Kerry King has said it. He goes, but they went out there and fucking did it. He goes, and they put on a show every time. Yeah. And by the time they rolled along, everybody was like, these guys are legit.
Yeah. Well, they got some street cred because they ran with the, you know, the bad kids from the wrong side of the track. And well, Jerry Cantrell, that was, you know, it was a nice segue from the old guard of the metal guys into what was to come. And maybe, you know, quite frankly, maybe Alice in Chains had a bad label. Maybe they just got thrown into that grunge pool, and maybe that was wrong. Maybe they weren't grunge. Were they grunge?
I think, I mean, they had some grunge, but see, the grunge aspect of it is just that dark underbelly
Seattle factor.
Yeah, the Seattle factor. That's the biggest thing, you know, because prior to this, Soundgarden and the Melvins were doing it way before all of them.
Yeah.
You know, and then you had Nirvana come along with the Bleach stuff. And then you had, you know, Green River and some of these other bands. And at the same time was when Alice in Chains was cutting their teeth. You know, you look at the one picture there. If you ever get a chance, on the back side of the CD for Facelift. And it's literally got them laying in this pile of sand in a quarry. And Lane Staley is wearing a tie-dyed spandex because for all intents and purposes, a lot of the stuff that they did was along that 80s metal kind of thing, you know? So, I mean, they never delineated completely from it. They just were a different child in that family. That's all it was, you know, but you know, the Alice in Chains and Soundgarden will always be the top two in that group for me.
And hey, Ian and Vern, one thing about Alice in Chains in 90, and this is another interesting fact from my road stories. Yeah, they toured that Clash of the Titans, but then they actually got the opening slot on the King's X Faith, Hope, and Love tour. And I saw him about 3 months later at the Cat Club in New York City, or I'm sorry, the Limelight. And again, you talk about a different audience. I mean, even a bigger, different audience at a club. Yep. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget watching Alice in Chains. And I already had seen him at the Garden, and then I went there to see him again. And then in between sets, King's X is setting up, and I look over my left shoulder, and there's this dude standing there drinking a Heineken, and who is it but Lane Staley? You know, and at the time I was young, man. I wanted to go up to him, but I didn't have the balls to do it. But, yeah, I mean, think about that. Playing a little club with King's X.
Yep. And King's X, man, they were on a trajectory, too, at that time, man. You know, they were one of those bands. Yeah. You know, you had that, you know, the stuff that was going on with Alice in Chains and, you know, obviously Soundgarden, you know, prior to this, you know, but you had King's X, excuse me. And for all intents and purposes, Living Colour kind of was in that it was something different. You know, they were one of those bands that came out at this time. And then, you know, obviously, you know, as you go down the road a little ways, you got Tool coming into it. This was that those bridge groups, you know, that were connecting, you know, what we came from to what's coming, you know, and they kind of kept us all in something at least a little bit tasteful at the time. But yeah, there was some really great music. Yes, sir.
Well, they're considered the old timers in the Seattle scene. Queensryche, 1990, their career topping album Empire. Well, what's your take with Queensryche? Empire fan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you didn't think it could get better after Mindcrime, they come back. They didn't copy Mindcrime all over again, which a lot of bands would have done. They came back, no concept album, shorter songs, ballad, radio-friendly, variety, saxophones in there, mood changes. It was really a progressive-y album at that time, and really very thoughtful, intricate lyrics. And I think it saw that, let's say, a different side of Jeff Tate that would come on the Promised Land, and then pretty much for the rest of the career in his band. But it elevated them into arena status. They were up there now. I mean, I saw them at the Meadowlands Arena, probably maybe one of the biggest shows of their career, 19,000 people headlining. And on top of it, the tour, they did the unthinkable. They played like half of the album to open the show. Then they did all of Operation Mindcrime complete, which they did not have a chance to do on the Mindcrime promo. And then they came back and finished out Empire and did some encores, like a 2-hour, 20-minute show. Unreal. Yeah, unreal. That's all I can say.
Ian, what's your take on Empire?
Love it.
Favorite song? Favorite song?
Believe it or not, favorite song is Anybody Listening. I love it just because of the depth and the intricacies that go into the song. It's just such a well-crafted song. And it goes from this nice melodic, very majestic, and then all of a sudden, do. Is there anybody listening? And I was like, oh my God, this guy. You know, it's such a good album. And, you know, the one thing that goes not mentioned enough is that when they were doing all of the MTV Unplugs was right around this time period when they really got started. Queensryche did their set, and they took a bunch of songs. One of the songs that they took was the song Della Brown off this album, and they did it on acoustic. And it is one of the coolest grooving songs ever when they do it on acoustic. And then they did the same thing with Take Hold of the Flame. You know, they did all these classic songs, but Empire was a great album, man. And you hit it on the head. I mean, this was their apex. You know, I mean, they went from, you know, Mindcrime to this, and it's like, wow, just mind blowing. Great stuff.
I like Mindcrime better, but I'm not being a get off my lawn guy. I love Empire, but Mindcrime is.
Oh, it's just genius. Yeah.
But, you know, Jet City Women, like you said, Della Brown. What else is on there? Best I Can.
Best I Can. Empire, the title track.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that song Empire, man, that's a freaking pretty dark, heavy song too at the time, you know, when they were doing that, you know, lyrical content and stuff.
You know, not for anything. We've always talked about the 5-packs. bands that like their first 5 albums, the first 5 Maiden, the first 5 Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth. But you put those first 5 Queensryche.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Easy.
That's,
Yep.
and then you compare a band like Queensryche to a band like Motley Crue. Are you kidding me? Like the first 5 albums of Motley Crue. Get out of here.
Fair point. Good point, Vern. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, maybe that's that's a new show.
That's a topic right there.
Point, counterpoint, fire and ice, whatever you want to call it. Now I'm fired up.
Sure.
All right, what else we got on here? You know what? I'm going to send it over to Ian. Okay. You wanted to say something?
Continue on the acoustic. I was going to say continue on the acoustic path and take it over to Tesla. Ian?
Yeah, the 5-man acoustical jam, that was a big thing at the time. When they did the song Signs, you couldn't turn on anything and not hear them doing that song. And, when they would stop and, on their tours, they started getting to a point where they would actually have an acoustic break, kind of like, Zeppelin and Aerosmith and all those bands would do. And they get out there and jam it. But that was a really, really cool album at the time. I remember that. And it was something I don't think that the rest of us maybe would have anticipated at the time because of what they did with Radio Controversy, after Mechanical Resonance. They were, you could see them, cementing themselves as that type of just really great hard rock band. And then they came out with and showed a whole other side. It was really cool stuff, and they fit perfectly. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and it's exactly what you stated about Queensryche on the MTV special, is they went out and they recrafted their own songs. I mean, coming at you live that led into Truckin', a cover of Truckin' from the Dead was awesome. Completely like a country style song. You had Signs. I mean, Lodi from John Fogerty or Creedence Clearwater Revival, that was awesome. That flew under the radar. Yeah. And I think that was the theme of it. It was how they actually recrafted their songs, which made it almost like listening to a new album. It wasn't just another live album.
That last summer, this summer, when we interviewed Brian Wheat, had a chance to interview him twice, and he expanded on all that, how that 5-man acoustical jam just came about. It wasn't like, it came about very quickly. And then, not jumping ahead a little bit, but they tried taking that on the road that didn't have the same magic. And that's what he said, that magic of the 5-man. And talk about lightning in a bottle.
The cool part about it is, you had Stevie Ray Vaughan doing the Unplugged. You had Queensryche doing it. You had at this time, Tesla doing the 5-man acoustical jam. You had all these bands that were getting in there. But like you were pointed out, Vern, for them to go on the road and try to replicate that magic, that was something that some of the bands that came down the pipe later on weren't able to do well. You would not see Stone Temple Pilots or any of those, or Pearl Jam breaking into an acoustic set because the kids wanted to hear the hits. They didn't want to hear them reinterpreting their hits because they only had one album at the time, where Queensryche had a body of work. Tesla had a body of work plus other stuff. All these bands had stuff to pull from, and they were able to recraft it and make it cool. And I think that right there is a big difference, when it comes to that type of musicianship and that type of guts. Guts is probably the biggest thing.
I think the whole San Francisco, even though they're from Sacramento, that California feel, the band had an old soul to it. Brian Wheat was, an older, big Beatles guy, 60s, and even then their early management and their producer,
Great stuff.
Let's see what else we have. The Scorpions, Crazy World, some of these old 80s arena bands, Scorpions, Crazy World, following up Love at First Sting and
Savage Amusement.
Yeah, Savage Amusement. Walt, any love for Crazy World?
It's good. It's a Scorpions 80s, early 90s album. Tease Me, Please Me, the title track. Did the big arena tours, cool stage, Winds of Change about the the communist countries and the Eastern Bloc coming down. That's probably about it. don't need to spend too much time on it. Had the 2 big hits.
Well, we all learned where Gorky Park was.
Exactly.
Now you're right. So, the Scorpions were putting it out. AC/DC, Razor's Edge.
Good album.
I think we talked about this pre-show. To me, that was a rebound album. It came back, big songs, MTV videos, Money Talks, Thunderstruck is at every sporting event. They played at my kids' sports games now. Big tour. They had LA Guns opening, Love Hate. They brought back Sin City into the set list. They played like a 2-hour, 15-minute show. It was definitely AC/DC. New drummer Chris Slade in there for Phil Rudd. They were really, really big, doing the big festivals in Europe. Big stuff from those guys.
The production on this album was very, you could see it, sitting next to an Empire or, any of these bands that, came out at the time. It was just in your face, AC/DC, the riffs were there, but modified almost, it's almost like they were vamped up for 1990. And that double live that came off, the tour with this, that's a freaking great live album, man. I love that live album. It's just so big and powerful, man. A lot of great material.
What about Pantera, Cowboys from Hell?
Love it.
Were you into it when it came out, or is it?
Yes. Yep. I can remember seeing the video for Cowboys from Hell, and that was something that grabbed me. I was like, "Oh, what are these? What's this?" I'll take a little bit more of that. And then as time went on, you get introduced to exactly who they are. They start when they did the Monsters of Rock tour in Russia with Priest. They were opening up for Priest, and they were showing those highlights of the stuff that you would see later on as the videos for Primal Concrete Sledge and Domination and stuff like that when they were playing it live, and you watch them, it's like, holy shit, these guys are insane. This is incredible. It was it was that breath of fresh air that some of the thrash stuff needed, because some of it kind of stayed too much in the track. Whereas we discussed with the Anthraxes and Testament, even with Slayer and obviously with, Megadeth, the musicianship started to expand a little bit more. That's what Pantera brought in. They had that kind of groove and swagger, but man, it was all about these kick-ass tunes, and they just did it right from the beginning. I didn't go back and check out, Projects in the Jungle or whatever the hell it was, and Metal Magic, not until way later. And I was like, yeah, okay, it's a good thing I didn't get into it at the time, but yeah, this is a great album. I loved it.
Yeah, I never, tell you the truth, I didn't see the visual of Pantera. They never grabbed me. They never really did.
It took them time to grow. I mean, that was their debut in 90, but they really were. It was a slow boil with those guys, right? It ended up supporting Skid Row, I think, a year later, and then, I mean, they were a big influence on Rob Halford leaving Priest and his project, the Fight Project, which we'll talk about in a couple of years. Yeah. That was a very big influence with Pantera. But any event, but yeah, definitely. How about just changing gears, guys? We got some other, let's say, ones that should get some attention even quickly. We have a quick one. Dio, Lock Up the Wolves. Nothing too crazy about this album, but it was a new lineup. He had Rowan Robertson on guitar. Yep. This kid was 18 at the time, 17. He had Jens Johansson from Yngwie, Simon Wright. They took Yngwie out on the road. He was playing more smaller places this tour. He brought back some rainbow medleys. It was just a good, refreshing time there. And then you had, one of my personal favorites. I always had a passion for the Tony Martin-led Black Sabbath. They released Tear, which was a more mature album over Headless Cross. It had a lot more acoustic and more broader-based songs. Neil Murray actually played on the album. It was generally a loose theme about the influence of the Nordic gods. And unfortunately, that was an album that didn't do well in the States. They never made it over here to tour, but definitely a good one to listen to. And then let's talk about the supergroup of the year, the Damn Yankees. Vern, you know all the players in the Damn Yankees. Let's hear about the Damn Yankees.
Love the Damn Yankees. Fucking Nugent, Tommy Shaw, Jack Blades, Michael Cardellone on drums. that just came out, and me and a good friend, Kale Jammer, we saw this tour at least 10 times. You know, they played everywhere. Fucking to this day, I still love it.
And how about that? Like, they opening up for Bad Company, and I love the Brian Howe era of Bad Company. Don't get me wrong, that stuff was good. Holy Water and No Smoke Without a Fire, but they could not follow the damn Yankees after that.
Didn't
I saw
they
the show in New
switch
York.
that? I thought they flipped.
They did. The next summer, they took the headline slot.
Nugent fit in there just like a glove. Fucking loved him. Ian?
Well, and, you know, you get, you know, his, I think that, you know, the one thing that was, you know, because when Ted writes what Ted is very well in this path. But you take two song crafters like Jack Blades and Tommy Shaw, and you have them say, okay, well, Ted, let's try something like this. And now it kind of gives him this big open, platform to be able to display Ted on.
Yeah.
You know, and he puts his insight in there. And that was just a really great hard rock album, man. I mean, for that time period, that kind of music, it was just huge. And it was everywhere.
There were no super groups at that time, especially made up of three guys from hard rock, metal, classic rock music. It just kind of came out of nowhere. It just absolutely. And it was a shame it was only short-lived. A couple of albums, they talk about getting together. It may or may not ever happen, but definitely I think we can all appreciate that one. Now, here's one I'd like to get into. It's a 1-2 punch. You have the Bruce Dickinson Tattooed Millionaire album, and then followed up with Iron Maiden's No Prayer for the Dying. So I'll get it started first. I loved Tattooed Millionaire. I don't know what you guys think about it. I think it was really, really different. You know, he had Yannick Gers out there who would join Maiden on the tour. They were short, more rock, very melodic songs. It was great to see. I saw 3 of those shows in the clubs, and it was just seeing Bruce up there. He did a Free cover. He did, I think he did Sin City on that tour. It was just something at that time that I wasn't familiar with, where these major artists stepped out of their big bands to go out, do a little tour in a club, put a solo album out. It was different at the time. That kind of thing doesn't wow the audiences anymore. Bret Michaels, Vince Neil can go out and do a solo show at a casino. It doesn't matter. At the time, it did. I'll never forget the Paul Stanley solo tour in '89, where he did deep tracks off of his '78 album and the Kiss deep tracks. Same parallel. What do you guys think of Tattooed Millionaire?
I liked it.
Yeah, I liked it. Hell on Wheels or Hell Wheels? Yeah.
Hell on Wheels.
Yeah, Son of a Gun.
Hell on Wheels.
Son of a Gun. Yep.
Obviously the title track.
The Tattooed Millionaire.
Yeah. No, I liked it. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see it like you, but
they encored. I remember as the tour went on, they encored with Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, which would end up on the next Maiden album. So it was almost like a treat to the fans.
Yeah.
And then I think, shortly after that, Yannick Gers would be introduced, I think, as the guitarist, if I have the order of it right. But definitely a good one. And you think about that, just to get a solo album and tour and then come back with a Maiden album later that year in the beginning of the tour, that would never happen in 2022, right?
No.
Well, and I like the partnership that he had with Yannick Gers and when Yannick went to Maiden, because that relationship musically that he had with Dickinson was huge. And you hit it on the head, Walt. He definitely had more of that European hard rock meets metal, very melodic, really good song crafting, a different thing than what Maiden was at their core. But he went in there and transitioned to do Maiden effortlessly. And when they ended up regrouping as a 3-guitar band, I mean, they're just phenomenal when you watch them on stage together. The musicianship that these guys share back and forth, and be able to tap dance over each other in these parts and not make it sound like a cluttered mess is actually freaking great.
It's funny that you use the word tap dance. I guess I can do without Yannick Gers and Iron Maiden.
What?
Yeah, I don't need it. Come on, no.
It's a British respect thing. I think he's been in there so long. They're not going to get him out of there. He still looks cool, skinny, tall, and old.
He's embarrassing. He's
no
fucking
prayer
embarrassing.
For the dying, no. Come on, Vern. But what about No Prayer for the Dying? Let's stay on topic. That one, I think, was a little underwhelming. it was, I don't know, it was actually the perfect package with them and Anthrax because it was a good tour together, but I think they were not their best bodies of work overall, those two albums, right? So it didn't get a lot of love, No Prayer for the Dying.
Well, there was the time when Bruce, he was leaving. It's been documented. He wasn't getting any chance to express himself. He didn't like where the music was going. So he eventually ended up leaving a couple years later. So,
listen, let's piggyback on to one that's an important one for all of us, I'm sure. And we could have segued real easily a little while ago. But that is the Painkiller album by Judas Priest. We definitely, if we're going from Maiden, we should definitely jump to Priest because that was a huge return to form for these guys. And I know you guys got to agree with me on that. I can remember when that first song dropped and frickin' Halford screaming like that. It was almost like the gates of hell opening up and getting ready to swallow everybody at once. It was just a great, great, powerful album from beginning to end.
Well, he goes out there, shaves his head. He gets the tattoo on the side of his head. He comes out there, and you're like, who's this new Rob Halford guy? Like, he's serious metal now, right? And then they drop that track on there. The video is scatterbrained. It's like all these changes, and it's like, flipping the screens, and you can't focus on it. Exactly knew what they were doing, and every song on that album is just killer, totally killer.
No filler at all. It's
no
from beginning, and I listened to it. It's one of those ones I drop the needle and let it go all the way through, man. Vern?
No, and it's just and they came out, they did those big tours again. We talked about it before. Megadeth and Testament opening the tour. Then they came back the following summer and they did the Operation Rock and Roll tour with Alice Cooper, Metal Church, and Motorhead. Yeah. They toured the shit out of that album, and I'll never forget opening up with Hellbent for Leather. That's usually towards the end of the show, and they open that tour with that, coming out on stage with the bike, not ending the show.
Yeah,
I mean, how fucking awesome is that?
Yeah. Setting the point right from the beginning.
Right.
What I remember most was how much I loved this album. After they regrouped in 05 or 07, and they did Angel of Retribution. Yeah. And with that opening, crescendo with the scream swelling into it. And then all of a sudden it just comes in with the double kick just blazing. I was like, that's what I loved about Painkiller. That album, it was almost like this is the bookend to that type of sound.
That song was left over from that.
Oh, was it really?
I read that in the KK book.
Oh, cool.
I'll fact check this, but that song was a leftover song, and it had to be from that era because there wasn't much, when Painkiller, when did Rob leave? A year or two later?
Yeah. I think right beginning of 92, maybe.
Yeah. So, but so when he came back,
the interesting part about Painkiller too is there was some suggestion that the lawsuit that they had to face in Reno, Nevada, I think earlier that year or later that year, could have been the influence behind the album, right? Because they wanted to come back with a vengeance, very heavy. They were really emotionally taken back. I mean, that was not a heavy metal music incident, but it was in the news. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever seen, there's an old documentary that I have on VHS somewhere where they actually interviewed one of the guy that lived in the shooting, and then he eventually passed away. But it was a disaster. And it was all about abuse in the households and alcoholism. And, here these guys used substances and somehow they coped with Judas Priest music, yet somehow the conservative side turned the music against them and ended up in a court of law.
Yeah.
These guys could have lost their shirts over this thing and ruined their whole careers, their lives, right? That was a huge, huge news incident, right?
Well, that was the thing, and, all that, those government panels, based around the PMRC and trying to, censor everything, that was a huge kick right in the ass, and the crazy part about it is it was a freaking liberal, senator's wife that was the one that started the goddamn thing. It's just no rhyme or reason. It's stupid.
That's crazy. I know. But that, I think, Ian, you're right. That is the high note of 1990 Painkiller. If we had to pick one that we all agree to, I think that's it. Before we conclude, I think a couple other quick shout-outs. We said we would come back to them.
Sure.
Winger released In the Heart of the Young, and they had 3 monster hits on there. Can't Get Enough, Miles Away, Easy Come, Easy Go. Big airplay there. And one that fell through the cracks that I think is worth as a quick shout-out is Shout-out, Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare. Cool little album, right?
Yeah.
And and then maybe we should – who can all forget the debut from Slaughter, guys? Come on. Round of applause.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stick It To You.
Yeah. Stick It To You is actually a pretty good album, man.
I was actually being facetious and sarcastic, but in any event.
I don't think you were. I think you're saving your guilty pleasure for the end.
No. I was really bummed out about that album, to be honest, because I love the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, and I thought, here comes Dana Strum and Mark Slaughter and Bobby Rock out of the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, and they're going to come in and form this band, and it's just going to be all the same kick-ass music, just without the headaches of Vinnie Vincent and a new guitar player, and it was basically soft crap.
Well, where are they now, and where's Vinnie now?
Well, Mark Slaughter can't sing anymore, but we won't get into that right now. That's not fair. I'm sure he's a nice guy. So, hey, let's leave this on a high note, right?
Yep.
The Grammys got it right. The previous year was Jethro Tull. This year, Metallica for the song One gets the Grammy. They got it right. They may not have repeated it ever again, but hey, it was cool at that particular time.
Couple sidebars. Yeah. Go ahead, Ian. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like Walt likes to point out on occasion, anybody that follows us should definitely do themselves a service. And if you aren't familiar with stuff, check out the stuff from 1990, because there really is a broad palette of music that's out there. And there's a lot of stuff that we didn't cover because there was so much material, but these are the ones that we were highlighting the most. So
no, well said, because I just want to make note of a couple. Chicago Sludgers, Trouble came out with their debut. Death Angel came out with Act 3. Annihilator, Canadian Metal, Never Neverland. King Diamond came out with The Eye. You guys are big Diamond fans. Were you a fan of this, or it's just King just doing what King does?
Just continuation of King. Yeah. It was something that, deserves a mention, but I mean, King at this point was almost like a machine in his own way. You watch those albums in a row, and it's almost like a continuation of a grand painting. It's still great material, but it's not like, I got to go out and get The Eye. If you get it later, you can get it,
Right.
And then another cool album, Jane's Addiction. They got a little mainstream. That Ritual to Habitual, Caught Stealing, and the fun fact with that, I think I have one on Metal Walt with the shows. Now we could go head to head, but it was the spring of 1991. Jane's Addiction had a special show in Rochester at the War Memorial. Totally like such a treat. It was sold out, and remember, it was 1991. It was, and they were a alternative, like, they were different. They weren't grunge. They were like true alternative from the 80s. And I fell in love with that band when I went there, and it was just great. But that album, they played that. They played All of Nothing Shocking. Ted Just Admit It. Ocean Song, Jane Says. Oh, my God.
Well, that's why I said, though, that's, they were part of that, that interweaving tapestry that was carrying us through, when things were changing over into the new alternative, so.
If you're going to give a shout out to Jane's Addiction, I have to give a shout out to myself, to my appreciation for one of my all-time favorite bands, Primus, who released their debut Frizzle Fry that year. They're another weird, hard rock, funky, experimental, avant-garde band, but they fall into this category in a weird kind of way. And they have big associations down the road with Rush.
I'm gonna have Walt bring this home. He's gonna give us a preview, but I want to say that the old Get Off My Lawn guy, which is the Vernomatic, learned something from my two younger co-hosts tonight that maybe, just maybe, I have some heavy metal homework to do and revisit some of this 1990s stuff.
Thank you.
Thank
you. What was 91 about? Massive releases from two really big bands. I'm not going to name them. You should know this. But then under the radar, you have really strong releases from a lot of established name bands. It's just one of those years when you look at 91, it's got a lot of good, some great releases. It just doesn't have that mass appeal and the chart toppers that you saw in the peak of the 80s. And I think that's sort of a trend to come through the 90s and the 2000s. Some other things, there were some, band members that left established bands. One band, a major band, just called it quits at that time. And then there were three really big deaths from three major artists in the rock and hard rock scene that would definitely have an impact on the scene. You know what? And just when we all get worried that there's not enough content to cover as we get into these different non-sexy years, we're going probably overtime. And that's a good thing, right?
Well, guys, this has been great, and we will put together 91 ASAP. So for my co-hosts, Metal Walt and Ian O'Rourke, I'm the Vernomatic. This is Metal Mayhem ROC. And as we always say, keep it heavy. See ya, gang.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.